So we're on our sort of last session, final stretch home before drinks, and it's a panel discussion. On it, we've obviously got representation from different portions of the industry. Clearly got government here. I'm not going to reintroduce Glenn. I mean, we introduced him a little bit earlier. We've got Todd. So until recently, Todd was Chief Operating Officer of Gold Corp. Prior to that, Senior Vice President, South America at Newmont Mining Corporation, responsible for leading business excellence, operations, and environmental stewardship. His multinational background in large-scale development projects, management systems, and operational efficiency over 2 decades. Todd is now Senior Vice President, North American Operations at Newmont Gold Corp. We also have Ryan at the end there. Ryan is from the Mining Suppliers Trade Association. I still prefer Kamisi, but anyway. Ryan has got 25 years of working in Canada and internationally in the mining industry for multinational mining, investment banking, and global manufacturing and drilling services companies. And he's currently Managing Director of MSTA Canada. And then we've got Marcus Thompson from Norcat, so obviously another critical portion of the mining ecosystem. Marcus works with Norcat and the Global Mining Guidelines Group, GMG, to build programs and partnerships and related to innovation for the mining industry. Before GMG and Norcat, Marcus led Innovation and Prosperity Office at SEMI. He has also been a General Manager and Business Development Manager in industrial, corporate software, and telecommunications verticals. Okay. So, I think today we've sort of gone through a real sort of a journey since earlier today. We've spoken about projects, what's real out there, what are some of the really cool things that CIMIC is working on and the industry collectively can harness and get value from. And then this afternoon, of course, we shifted the topic towards the ecosystem to say, to do all of those things, it's not just about one individual or one company trying to do that. Really, it's how do you get the power of the collective? And so how do you get mining companies and engineering companies and supply companies and academic institutions and various other enablers within the ecosystem to kind of work together to realize those particular innovations? So that's really the kind of the core topic that we want to talk about today with the panel. And so I've got 3 questions, which I'm going to really sort of pose, and we'll sort of work through them sort of sequentially. And then I'll also leave some time to open up to the floor and get some comment from you folks and engage the panel in a discussion. So the first question to the panel is around the current state of the mining innovation ecosystem in Canada. And so how would you guys characterize it? So why don't we start with you, Todd?
Well, look, I mean, after today, I guess I would say we're on the right track. The start is there, right? I mean, I saw some, this was probably 4th or 5th year that I've been engaged or with CIMIC, and things have shifted over time. And I think what we saw today, though, what I saw was, tangible evidence that things are actually headed in the right path. There's a lot of collaboration going on, and projects are starting to advance. And what we saw was some amazing stuff. So I mean, look, I think that, I think the core of the ecosystem is there, and I think it's got to grow from there. So maybe we've planted a seed and it's going to grow, but I'm feeling more comfortable that there's a commitment amongst key players in the industry to change the way we do things and actually collaborate together and forget about, call it the traditional, competitive advantage that we all thought we would get back in the day, and realizing that this is broader than that. So, generally I think it's healthy. I think it can always get healthier, right? I'm sure we'll talk about maybe some of those ways, but in general, look, I think we've got willing partners, and we've got people that share somewhat of a common vision, at least in certain areas, willing to put time and resources together to advance these things. And so that's encouraging. Would I prefer that there was, all of the industry here? Absolutely, I would. But, that's going to take some time, and I think that we'll get there by leading by example. And eventually people are going to, you know, the amount of enthusiasm that gets generated by these things are going to drag people into it, and that's just the nature of it. So I accept that role. That's fine. We'll blaze the trail.
Okay, great. So let me turn over to Ryan. So Ryan, from a supplier's perspective, what's your feeling on the current state of this ecosystem?
Well,
how would you characterize it?
Yeah, well, kind of like what Todd said there, is that we're on the right track.
And by the way, we don't all have to be Canadian. We can actually
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, be controversial. Okay, I get it. No, but but you know, when I look at, say, what we did, the exercise with the CLEAR initiative, when the supercluster funding event, you know, it showed that there was a willingness across Canada, no matter how, you know, disseminated we were, that there's this willingness to come together as an industry. And although they, you know, that didn't show, it didn't really come to fruition the way we wanted it, I think it kind of set, you know, an indication, put things in kind of motion that we could do something. And it sounds, you know, Glenn kind of spoke to this already, that still there's this perception that we are still fairly fragmented. From my standpoint, the majority of my membership are actually small to medium-sized enterprises, and when I see this, I still see a lot of, I'll call them trailblazers, the big OEMs, fairly large. I see, nice to see Meditech, Sepro, and McLean in the mix, but McLean is actually a big company to me. So to me, it's about how do we accelerate that inclusivity with some of these companies, and get everybody kind of on board, as Todd was talking about. I think that's the next step for us, is accelerate this. And to hear, you know, your presentation there, what I loved about it was there's a sense of urgency to it, and there's a very defined timeline, and you guys are running at full tilt, you know, come hell or high water. And I think that's what we kind of have to have. And, you know, but we need to be realistic about what we're doing, how we do that. So I think that gets into the other conversation.
So I mean, I think I would characterize Todd as being sort of cautiously optimistic about the sort of the future of sort of collaboration and where we are right now. I mean, how would you characterize your optimism, Ryan?
Mine?
Yeah.
Well, the pieces are there. Like, it's a matter of us actually putting it together. So I am optimistic. I have to maintain that, or else we're kind of like, why bother? But I think there's definitely, I think we just got to keep moving forward and faster in terms of garnering that momentum and getting more people on the train, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Marcus, I mean, NORCAT sits at this really interesting intersection between sort of suppliers, the mining industry, and so as you guys kind of look at NORCAT and what you're seeing is sort of happening on a day-to-day basis, I mean, again, how would you characterize that level of collaboration and the state of the ecosystem?
So it's a good question. I think to date was a really good example of real projects, which to me is a real valuable suggest. Like it's a thing that the ecosystem is working. We're an organization. We're not government funded, and I think that has been something that's been to our advantage to a certain point. But we are the world's only nonprofit with an operating mine. And I think the ecosystem we can see today, I'm looking around, there's Mac and Al, and I saw Semi, and Carl brought all of us together. And I think I think we're on our way.
Okay. Glenn, so from a government perspective, you obviously spoke about forestry and you know what FP Innovations is actually doing in the state of the forestry thing. And by the way, until today, I never knew that like the Internet of Trees or whatever it was called, or forests, was a thing. But that was pretty cool. The Internet of Forests, yeah, pretty cool. So from a government perspective, is the mining industry doing the right things today? I mean, is it going to get you to the vision that you kind of laid out?
No.
Okay. Say a little bit more. Switch off the cameras.
Open.
Yeah, I'm going to try and not say everything I should. So while I agree with my colleagues, that's the Canadian bit, yes, but not fast enough. And so I guess, you know, if you're sitting in Sudbury, I think the answer is yes. You've got a wonderful ecosystem in Sudbury. If you're sitting in Ottawa and trying to understand the country, it's really fragmented. And it depends on where you want to engage. And so in terms of engaging, so from my perspective, with the federal government, it's a lot more complex, I think, than the other natural resources sectors. So are there neat things going on? Absolutely. And you know, those two fabulous presentations this morning, we're both finalists in the Crush It competition, right? And that was an NRCan, Government of Canada competition to promote innovation. But that's not an ecosystem, that's not a thing, that's, you know, that's kind of a one-off. So like, where is this, you know, that's great, but that's not enough, right? And so I was looking around wondering how many of you had your pencils out and your calculators doing the math on the cost savings that were going to come from those innovations, and whether or not you were thinking about the mines that you're going to design that are going to take advantage of those two ideas and perhaps even bring them together. And I don't know, I didn't have anybody, I didn't see people doing that, but I think there's an opportunity to do more. And when you look at that kind of the smart mine of the future, the interesting thing, and so I go back to something that Adrian had said at the Mining Outlook Dialogue about 1.5 years ago, that most of the innovation in the mining sector is going to come from outside the mining sector in the near future. Those innovations that you talk about in the smart mine of the future, I make a generalization. They're all areas that Canada is world leading in. Right, like we're sitting here in Ottawa, we're sitting here in Toronto, Montreal, globally important centers on AI. Globally important centers on AI. All the AI companies are coming to locate in Toronto and Montreal. In fact, at SIM, I met a CEO of a company that had just been purchased by Sandvik, and he said, and Sandvik's going to keep us in Montreal, and we're going to be the global AI headquarters branch for Sandvik. Why? Because Sandvik sees that's what Montreal has. So I think there's enormous opportunity. If you put together the traditional strength of the Canadian mining industry and the Canadian mining engineering knowledge together with these innovations at the edges, and so I really think it's about the edges and how we interact and bring in these other sectors, I think there's a fabulous opportunity. I do worry about academia. I do worry about the students and whether there's enough students and mining engineers and geologists coming in to be trained, because they're the next generation. And Dalhousie's thinking about closing its mining school. And the great success that is Canada was built on geology and geologists and people going out and exploring. And so what strikes me, and as an outsider coming to the sector, is this amazing end-to-end value chain that we have. And granted, we don't own a lot of the big, the Sandviks, the big OEMs anymore. But Canada, more than almost any other country, really has that end-to-end value chain. And that's when 2 + 2 = 5. And that's why we need to care deeply about the supply and services sector and what they bring to the table. And why I talked about IP earlier, if I can channel Jim Balsillie for a minute or two, the speaker this morning talked about $1 trillion being the entire sector and that being one Apple. Jim keeps saying 95% of the stock market valuation of the top 500 companies in the world is all intangibles. And the play is data, and the play is IP. And so do we have an IP strategy? And that really interesting Syncrude example, who's going to get the IP from that? Is it going to be Syncrude? Is it going to be its partners? Or is it going to be Amazon or Google? And that's where the money is going to spin in a really, really big way. Another example, that, going back to Adrian, that he used a year and a half ago on my $1,000 iPhone, how much of that goes to the mining industry? And I think the amount is less than $2, right? And so what do you want out of that? You want to capture more of that. And so that's the reason I announced earlier the Canadian Battery Initiative, which is we need to get into that space. Companies are interested in investing in Canada, and they're interested in doing more than just mining. It's about secure, long-term, reliable, responsible supplies of minerals, and Canada's a great place for that. So, sounds like a long answer, but I do agree that we got a lot of the right stuff, but I think we can do better.
So I want to pick up on a couple of things, and then you've already started to transition to the bit of the second question. But let me start at the beginning when you mentioned Sudbury, right? And so I think you look at Sudbury, it has the advantage of being geographically proximate. The reality, however, of our mining industry is it spans coast to coast, right? And it encompasses companies that are headquartered in Canada but with dispersed operations kind of around the world. And I think therein is also Canada's advantage. But it is a complex industry to collectively marshal in kind of one direction, right? So I kind of put that as an overarching challenge. What you also mentioned was the need for this industry to move with speed and urgency, right? You mentioned the need to kind of look outside of the mining industry and look at other sectors and saying, hey, what can we bring from those sectors back into mining, and is that collaboration with those other sectors occurring? You mentioned talent pipeline, and so have we got the talent and this pipeline of people to be able to support where the industry needs to go? And then you spoke about looking at the end-to-end value chain and looking at the margin and the value that mining captures as kind of key themes. And so my second question, which I'll again put to the panel to kind of build on that, and I think Glenn has already kind of tabled some of those things, but what do you think is necessary for us to move the dial on this innovation ecosystem? What's required from us being, all right, we've made a really good start, and we've got the right kind of dialogues going, to how do we get this on steroids over the next period of time? So, Todd.
Yes, I would say I may be less pessimistic, and I don't think you're pessimist, but what I saw today is, yes, there was a number of the same companies' names up there, but around those names were new players, and they're generally smaller companies. And this isn't anything against the big OEMs, but look, they're difficult to work with to innovate, right? So I think as an industry, we have been reaching outside the traditional sort of mine suppliers and looking for the smaller suppliers. If you want pace, go get into some software developer's office and tell them I need something like this. By the time I get back to the office, they've already sent something to me, and I said, how does that work? That doesn't happen like this. And you got to get used to that, right? And so I think pulling in more universities, I agree. One of the things that I think energizes me the most is going to UBC and sitting down with them, because one, they're way smarter than I ever was at that point in time. And I think the future's in great hands, but the question is do they have the right skills? A mine engineer, you don't really need a lot of them anymore. What you really need is people that can apply different things to the mine. And you need a mine engineer that understands other things. So I think we need to be looking at what's the curriculum, right? And naturally, I think they're more savvy around technology, and they're more savvy around what's possible than any of us. So I think focusing a bit on that, and I think I may be rambling a little bit here, but at the end of the day, I'm excited about where we're going. And yes, we are spread out, but I think that's an advantage, right? And you mentioned it, right? If we're sitting out in Vancouver, there's amazing things going on in Vancouver, but where I get concerned is they may not be connecting with Montreal or connecting with Toronto. And what we need to do is more projects where we're bringing those people together, because when you put those people in a room, what you thought you were going to get when you started is not what's going to come out the other side, but it's going to be better, and it's going to be, it's going to have a different perspective. But at the end of the day, we got to get more people engaged, and I think the way to do it is the smaller suppliers. I'm not knocking the big suppliers. they have their place, but for a lot of what we're trying to do, they're not set up to solve these kind of issues. They're not set up to apply the kind of technologies, that we need applied. So I think reaching outside, reaching into the smaller, the smaller shops of people that one may not have anything to do with mining, but they understand how to solve problems, and that's key to me right now. And so to me, I am encouraged. I really think that the fact that we've got new players participating, collaborating on these projects with urgency, with pace, that's fantastic, right? I mean, this is a night and day difference than last year or the year before, for certain. I think we're definitely headed there. Ecosystem, is supposed to be the size, the breadth, across Canada. It would be fantastic, but I think we're starting to get there. I guarantee you, there's lots of people talking amongst each other, exchanging ideas and working together on it. But it'll get bigger as we go. Okay. I'm sure of that.
Ryan.
Yeah. Well, the two words that come to my mind how to make it move is trust and safety. I've said this to Carl and stuff, right? Stephen Covey wrote a book on At the Speed of Trust. And I think the more like-minded individuals we bring into the foyer or into the group here is going to help that kind of acceleration. And when I talk about safety, it's about how do we help the mining environment to what NORCAT's doing is how do we take this testing out of the operating environment and put it in a safe place where we can get the proof of concept and scale it to a point where it's a little more safer to actually start putting it into a live environment. And I think those two elements there, bringing in more like-minded people and then making it safer for the mining industry. Hearing people talking about, it took us 30 years to acquire HPGR, or the saying, well, one of the biggest things that was holding us back was deciding what size this thing should be. We need to kind of get over that and pushing it and making it happen faster and say, we'll figure this out along the way. But that requires trust, and it's got to be in a safe environment to be able to do that. So I'll just kind of leave it in that kind of ethereal level.
Okay. Marcus.
Yeah, so this is a GMG answer, but one of the things that we're seeing is interoperability is a real challenge, and it's something that's preventing the mining industry from really accelerating. If you look at your phone, you got all these apps on here, and the reason that you can have all those apps is they've got a platform and they all work together. It's really difficult if you are in AI and blockchain in something novel for mining, and you have to figure out the data stuff also. So if data is becoming the area that's really important, that's one area that I think there's a lot we can learn from other industries.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I look at this and what you folks haven't mentioned, there are two themes which for me would have sort of come to mind. One would have been around how you manage this sort of traditional relationship between a supplier and a mining company, right? And so, historically, I think they've been sort of governed by procurement or sort of supply chain type relationships. But when you're talking about ecosystem, you're talking about a different construct. You're talking one where you're sharing intellectual property. You're putting some skin in the game with some kind of risk and upside. You are being transparent with the broader ecosystem around kind of what you're doing. Do you think that's there in the industry today?
I think it's uncommon in the industry. Yeah. It's the willingness for some of the major suppliers to, put skin in the game is low. I mean, it is. It's, even with assurances from us saying we recognize that it's going to take a while to perfect this, but our view is it's not going to get perfected until it's in an environment that we can actually demonstrate it. I mean, designing it, building it, running it in the factory, running it, in a test is a very different thing than actually running it in a mine site. And, we're happy to try to accelerate that by accepting a level of risk, saying, look, I understand it may not be 100%, but the concern with that is nobody can afford to have a product that they put on the ground that doesn't perform at 100% or do what they say it should do, because then they're afraid that it gets branded as a failure from day one. And you know, and that's why things are really slow with this. I mean, you know, you mentioned, you know, a nonprofit with an operating mind. I can tell you there's a lot of operating minds that would qualify as nonprofit. and that's part of the problem, right? I mean, the penalty for us is severe. If you put something new and it doesn't work, suddenly, you know, you're penalized. Your share price underperforms, and the next thing you know, life is horrible. But you do need to take some risk on these things. But you know, that unfortunately, I do think that's why I think the smaller shops are willing. And I think what happens is, you know, you mentioned, you know, Sandvik's been buying up all the up and comers from day one, right? That's their model. They see who's doing it well, who the minds are engaging with, and they go buy them. And then they suck them into their organization, and we go talk to somebody else. Because once they get into those big groups, the doors close. You don't get to see behind the curtain and what they're working on, because they're only going to show you what's in their brochure at that point in time. That's a frustrating part of this. And you know, so I do think that, you know, working, you know, we keep working on that to try to get that relationship to a point where it's a partnership, and we're saying we need something that does this. We're willing to invest. We're willing to co-develop on this. We've been successful in some areas, other areas less so. But at the end of the day, there is, you know, it's not that they're the only game in town. There's other games in town, and they're much more nimble.
Yep.
It's a lot cheaper, I'll tell you that. You know, to go to 5 people sitting in a shop in Vancouver to develop something is way cheaper than doing it with one of the big, you know, the big suppliers. So at the end of the day, I think they're important, but I think they will respond just like everybody else. When they see us working here, they're going to have to change their model, or they will get left behind.
Ryan, so building on what Todd has said, from a supplier perspective, I mean, what needs to change, maybe from a mining company perspective, in order for suppliers to put more skin in the game?
I think what Todd's doing, I think what their company is doing is the right approach, right? And because I brought up trust and safety, there's a lot of small companies there that are afraid to get in the game for virtue of getting bought out too early, or being harvested at a point where they're not ready. And so not trusting the process, or not feeling safe that they can get into an environment with a bigger picture group and not get swallowed up in the process, right? So be it perceived or real, it's something. And so that's just maybe more of an education. I see the more and more we do this, the more and more we learn more, the more people see more. And that's a big piece. Like, where the evangelism of this whole thing is like, let's get out there, let's talk about it. And all of a sudden you start realizing there are people doing similar things that are tied to each other, or the symbiotic nature of that connection. So it's just a matter of getting the word out. There's a lot of people willing to get in. Some are just trying to figure out how. And we're all looking at, what do you mean? We're all here waiting for you. But they don't know we're even here. So there's this kind of, you know, somebody mentioned it, go back to your organizations and keep broadcasting. You know, there are big organizations that are still trying to filter through that in their culture. But that's what I meant by the trust and safety piece, is that, you know, getting them in a place where it's like, it's okay to be a part of this. And I think groups like yourself, Todd, that are demonstrating that they can be of value and they can make it by this kind of co-development scheme or something, is a positive.
So one of the other themes, which I didn't hear the panel sort of talk about, which I'll throw out there as well, I reflected on I was at a dinner last night, and so, you know, one of those particular individuals was in this room, and we were sitting and talking last night, and one of the things that he said to me was that what the industry lacks is a burning platform. And so what is the burning platform that's going to get us to move the dial on innovation? You know, is it Glenn's lofty picture about, you know, mining as being kind of the greatest, you know, or Canada being the greatest mining, you know, sort of country in the world? You know, is it going to be around a vision around kind of climate change and lowering carbon emissions? Like, is that the stuff that's going to get CEOs out of bed in the morning and saying, oh my God, I need to be pumping all my money into CMIC and putting it in the industry to drive innovation and drive step change performance? Like, what's the burning platform that gets this industry moving? Thoughts?
You're looking to me?
Anybody on the panel? Whoever wants to take it.
I think it very much depends on what you're trying to do. So if you have a project that's at depth, automation is important, battery electric's important, Getting the real-time data is important because having the people on the ground doesn't necessarily make the mine work. So when it's that sort of a project, then the burning platform is just having the mine exist. It's different from mines that already do exist, but then it's just a matter of, I think, keeping it existing. But we certainly don't have the same sort of burning platform for some things that exists in like airlines. Predictive maintenance, like the scoop's not going to fall to the sky if you don't fix it, right? So some of it's kind of just the way that the system works, where we don't have burning platforms, and now it's a matter of, are we going to treat those as opportunities?
Todd?
I think what's, I mean, if you look at, the forest products, I mean, newsprint went, 50% or 60% reduction. I can tell you whatever product we produce, somebody's going to buy it. I mean, it's not like we have a trouble, marketing gold or zinc or anything that we produce. Sometimes the prices are a little lower, but at the end of the day, it's not like the demand isn't there. But to me, and you're right. I mean, I think a lot of where we've struggled to get that collaboration and integration is everybody has a unique situation and problem to solve. It's like, I got a mine at 3,000 meters. I have to do this. I have to do that. I think you got to step up a little bit larger level on this thing. And I think that I look at this, and people have heard me say, look, I don't think we'll be around in 20 years if we don't change. And look, I think that's, mining will be around. But if we don't change, it's going to be exactly like it is today. I mean, I can tell you what, I mean, I kid all our project teams because they bring me projects and I go, why are you going to spend a year and a half to study this? I can tell you what the project return is going to be today. Why? Because you're going to design this exactly like you have for the last 40 years. So let's just cut to the chase and tell me it's a 12% project. Do you want to invest or not? But at the end of the day, that's the reality. And so I know what the outcome will be, but I don't accept that outcome. I think there's better. We can do better. We can actually produce more value from that finite resource that's in the ground if we change the way we do things. Things like ore sorting and microfracturing the rocks. I mean, this allows us to extract higher degrees of value from that ore body, which I think is that's our job. Our job is to, you only get one of these, and if it's a really good one, you want to maximize the value of that, right? And
Yep.
So at the end of the day, I think you got to step up. That burning platform is, if you accept the status quo is the best we can do, then there is no burning platform. But if you challenge that and say, we have to do better, now you can start to make things like tell a project team that you're going to do an all-electric mine. At the end of the day, they spent a lot of time trying to convince some of us that it was better to go diesel. At the end of the day, I said, I don't care. Because I know what I'm going to get if you put a diesel scoop down there and a diesel fleet. I know what that value that is. Let's look bigger and say, set the tone for the future. And I think you need more leaders that are willing to say, I would love to say that I did it because I was really concerned about, climate change. And I didn't. I did it because I wanted to change the way we do things. Thankfully, there's a great, there's an added value from that. But whatever it is that drives you to drive change, that's what people need to adopt as the burning platform. If you want to just continue as an industry as we are today, just keep doing what we're doing today, and that's where we'll be. And so I just don't accept that we have to do better, right? And part of it for me is, again, it's just we create a lot of impact, and I think that there should be a higher return for that impact that we actually create. And the way we do it is change the way we do things.
You look at, I was just in Australia, and Tara, you were over there, part of the team, and we were at Rio Tinto's office in Brisbane, and talk about Reimagine Mining. They've got a think tank that they put together, a very diversified group of people from their workforce of whatever, they scanned 40,000 people. And this is what's on the table for this thought group is, should Rio Tinto be in mining in 10 years or 5-10 years, right? Like, they're really, really thinking, how are we going to do things different? So it comes back to that leadership and that willingness to, what are we going to do different? And listening to Tom, I think there's a shareholder group out there that's coming into the fold here that's going to be different from our traditional shareholders, which are, when someone says, hey, we got to pressure the CEO, well, the CEO's got shareholders. And so the majority shareholders are pushing them. And so every 3 months, unfortunately. So, that complexity, I think, if we can change that part too, that also changes and makes it easier for the leadership to move into the directions that we're kind of talking about here. But it comes back again to like-minded individuals and turning the needle, because eventually we'll have that take off.
Glenn, what are your thoughts on a burning platform for the Canadian mining industry?
There is none, and I think that's
There is none, or there couldn't be one?
Well, there could always be one. I was
But there isn't
talking
one
to
today.
I was talking to a leading scientist. What should we do for a battery challenge? And his best, I think we should find another metal to replace nickel. Something that would be, because he thinks we're going to run out of nickel. Because if you've looked at the forecast for EVs, it's just astonishing. And I would encourage you, if you haven't had a chance, to look at the World Bank's work on climate smart mining. It's important, it's directionally accurate, and it really speaks to the importance of our sector. I don't think that there is a burning platform today, and that's what worries me in a sense, that that's what can drive change. But could tailings be the burning platform? The series of disasters in Brazil, I think that's possible. Though I would say it doesn't get a lot of play in mainstream media in Canada, so I'm not sure that that would drive Canada. I think it's really important globally. The other area you could be turned into a platform is some variation of social license, which is, there's a beautiful lithium mine in Quebec that threatens some of the purest water in Canada, and the community's not interested in letting that go ahead. And regardless of what we say about our ability to mine safely going forward, we don't have the best record in the world, and there are existing operations across the resource extraction industry that continue to worry Canadians and worry communities. And so, I would put to you, I would put to any of you, would you be prepared to have your cottage downstream of a mine? And if the answer is no, then we're not doing good enough, because the future has to be like as close to zero footprint as possible. And then I'm not just talking about carbon, but just in terms of the impact overall, like the ability to contain our environmental impact. And then I would add to you another thing, which is, what about when global capital wakes up and starts worrying about what Mark Carney's been saying and what Stephen Pelosi is saying, which is, we're going to use climate change risk to guide our investments, which is, I don't care about the morality of what you're doing, I'm just worried about the risk. So what is the risk of permafrost in tailings 50 years from now? And those are the kinds of the climate change adaptation, climate change risk that I think could be profound for not just us, like utilities, like everybody. And there's a very, very strong movement globally at the very highest levels. Obviously, Case Desjardins, Michael Sabia is at the forefront of this in Canada, but there's a global movement of investors, and then you saw the Church of England reaching out. So I think that could be the potential burning platform. And I would just say to us as a community, it's one thing to talk about we're going to be the best going forward, there's not going to be any killings and so on. We have to worry about our legacy as well. We have to clean up our legacy as a sector. And to the extent that we can make money doing that, we should make money doing that. And that's a technology problem. But that also speaks to how society views us and how, and that contract, this society trusts us to clean up.
Thank you. So I'm conscious of time. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes, and I want to throw it open to the floor and get any questions from the floor to the panel. We've covered a lot of interesting things. Over to you. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Carl. Just as a newcomer to CNIC, I just wanted to say that my perceptions are very positive of what has been done so far, and I know there's a lot of self-reflection and people talking about whether things are happening fast enough. I have to say I'm just very encouraged overall by some very positive things that are going on. But noting also maybe just partial participation by some major players, and it's something that I hope we can contribute to on Glencore's side by stepping things up a little bit where it makes sense. Very proud of what Shane and Don and others have done. We'll be looking for opportunities to contribute to maybe some of these things on a corporate level. Burning platform. I think there is a burning platform. Being mostly involved in a global business, very interested in how we're doing in Canada. I think we're on the base metal side, we're falling behind. There's just more opportunity elsewhere, and the burning platform is being able to, hearing what Todd said, 12%. It's a very common number. I think the number slips to 12%, sometimes it goes to 8%, and then the capital doesn't come, it goes somewhere else. So really what the burning platform is actually being able to sustain the industry and having this industry in a healthy form in Canada. I imagine it will exist for a long time in maybe a diminished form, but we can see from our own investment opportunities that we have to step it up if we're going to just sustain our business. That's not grow it. There's some big things happening in the developing world. A lot of the things that Glenn mentioned, developing world doesn't necessarily see it that way. China doesn't play that game. We're not going to run out of nickel. Developing world is going to use a lot of, the nickel's going to come from China. It's 10 times what we are already. They can refine it to higher state on batteries, just a matter of cost. So a lot of things going on, all very interesting. I want to thank you for raising them to this level of discussion, and look forward to taking part going forward.
Great. Other questions from the audience? There we go. Jim.
I thought it was very interesting. So I'm just going to take perspective from when I did my master's, and I just did a recent visit to your labs with Jonathan. And I think that's where this group can make a massive difference. Toronto is a major mining hub. Basically, everyone has a headquarters here. Go visit U of T. Go visit Queens. Look at their facilities for mineral processing. And it's sad, honestly. The work that comes out of there is amazing, especially considering what they have for resources. But we don't have, in Canada, aside from NORCAT or batteries.
But we can hear you.
It's working again?
Yeah,
all right.
It's working.
And so that's probably somewhere, something that Glenn said about forestry was the fact that in the forestry industry they had a great thing happening, 400 researchers, and then the funding got cut. We know how annuities work in mining, so perhaps we should put something in where we actually support the physical space where we're doing innovation at scale. Because a lot of the discussion in the CIM's DMP is, oh well, it's bench scale, so it doesn't scale up. Well, how do you go to scale it up when you don't have the research facilities to actually show it at least at like maybe 10 tons an hour or something, right? And then you're de-risking. So I think that's something, and maybe it'd be interesting to hear the opinions of the panel on how we can, as a group, like actually support our researchers.
Thoughts on the panel on that question on supporting researchers at universities?
I think the government would be good at that.
Glenn's going to cut you a check.
I
Any
can tell you
comments on
that,
that?
look, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
without the facilities, the things don't happen, right? And, I think, fortunately, there are a lot of, facilities out there that we tend to use. I would agree, as I think the universities are probably, don't necessarily compete with some of the other businesses that have the ability to test things at scale. And, I can tell you as a mining company, I don't want to be in the business of owning a big test facility. In fact, mining companies have done that for a number of times, and they tend to be in them for a bit, then they sell them and get rid of them. It just has never worked as a mining company. But certainly, again, I think that there is opportunity, and to see things like field scale, and you said it, you have to test things in an environment that makes sense to you. And so, look, I would be happy to talk about how does mining, how does the industry actually support support that, fantastic. I mean, again, I am worried about the next generation myself, but I think that should be necessarily, you got to combine, call it the fundamental mining metallurgy type stuff with, today's technologies, and where you do that, you need the facilities to do that.
So we're going to take two more questions. Vic, and then we've got one question at the back. You okay, Gord? Okay, Vic.
So let me first of all start that there is already a burning platform. We've just gone through 5 or 7 years of one of the worst recessions in terms of the mining industry. There were no jobs for students, and a lot of those people that used to go into mining engineering didn't go to mining engineering. All of our mining schools, there's 11 of them across the country, are suffering, all of them. Half of the numbers that we used to have are now going into mining. So we won't have the leaders in the future. I can tell you that right away. And I support the fact that we're not, the industry is not supporting the universities, and neither is government for that matter. I go to China and I do a deal with Northeastern University. Their facilities there are way over anything that we have in Queens or U of T or anywhere. Countries support their infrastructure. Countries support their innovation research capacity because that builds a whole bunch of other things, including the supply service industry. I'm old enough to remember the good old days when Mark Boissonneau's predecessor there, Cowboy James, oh gosh, who am I thinking of? We used to go on TV and he'd say, keep the dollar down, keep the dollar down. The mining industry, and I'm really pleased we have a lot of good leaders like Jim. Jim came out from Vancouver, and unfortunately, there are too few. There should be more in this room. Real leaders to make sure that we're seen. At the top of your pyramid, you mentioned brand. I think it was Janet Zink's Maslow's order of, we're at the survival stage. We're 26th in this province. We're 26th in the world in terms of innovation, investment. The last mine that we developed, it's been 10 years, and we've got a heck of a problem in terms of trying to get anything through. The new government is at odds with the federal government here in Ontario, and that's a big problem. We have to work as a country, not a bunch of fiefdoms. So there are a lot of problems, and I'm not trying to be, put a downer on everything, but we also have to realize reality. I think the public service finally has their shit together in terms of what you presented on that plan. Now we've got to get the politicians to buy into it, and we've got to get enough industry leaders to push them in the right direction. And I think that's something that's essential. If you look at Australia,
Vic, can I ask you to wrap up quickly?
The universities, industry, and government are working together. We're not. That is not something we do well. So what I'm saying is that while we can accept that, this was a great day, we've got good things happening, let's try and figure out how we can get it up to that top of the pyramid and make sure that we sell the Canadian brand, because we're going to lose it. They can go to every other country in the world. They don't have to do it here in Canada.
Glenn, any quick responses from you, or?
No.
Okay. Very last question. Here you go. Yeah, it's working.
Okay, so just 2 points. I'll try to be quick. To me, I just think one of the things that I'd be really interested and focused on is a whole commercial side of how do we develop innovation. If we look at, I think you mentioned, Glenn, about IP, and how do we look at the risks and rewards in bringing innovation to life? Because if you can figure out the drivers of what makes more people show up to these things and have the proper reward for investing in innovation, you will drive change a lot faster. To me, I think we have smart people, we have the money, we have everything, but I'm not sure we've spent as much time on the commercial model to make it happen faster. And the second point I have is, you know, when I think about mining and I recruit, I always say mining really truly matters. If you want to make a difference in the world, be in mining, because you have the opportunity to make the biggest difference. And I do think the younger generation really cares. There's no such thing about, to me, as being against mining. We have to mine. And so I find that the hope for me is I see as we recruit more younger people, they're smarter, they're faster, and they really give a rat's ass, and they really do want to make a difference, and they are innovative. So I'm hopeful, and I really hope, I really hope that there's people out there that really want to look at a new commercial model about how we do this better, because I think that's all that we need. And I think we've got the desire, and I think we've got the people, and that's it. The end.
Well, on that very positive note, thank you very much to the panel.